Welcome back. This is News Gang. We just want to remind you of the news that is just in. The new prices of fuel for the next month, starting midnight tonight. That's in about 50 minutes from now. The price of super petrol is up 16 shillings 96 cents to 211.64 shillings a litre. Diesel is up 21 shillings and 32 cents to now retail at 200 shillings and 9 cents per litre. The biggest jump is for kerosene that goes up by 33 shillings and 13 cents. It now crosses the 200 shilling mark at 202 shillings and 61 cents a litre. That marking, what did we say today is the first day the second day of President William Ruto's administration, when one of the key planks was to manage the cost of living and reduce the price of fuel. Among them was, he talked about the taxes. And he said that to me on the 26th of July, 2022, at the presidential debate. This in light of a government-to-government oil deal between Kenya and Saudi Arabia, whose first payment falls due this month. So just thought we'd put that in context. While all of that is happening, and while you digest that, the government is now reviewing what their revenue collection strategy will be for the next, for the medium term, that's 2024 to 2027. And there are some proposals to increase taxes there as well. Irungu Houghton, before the break, told us that Jesus was crucified on a tax crusade. We are not short of not just enthusiasts, but those who are knowledgeable about the Bible. So what's there to be prepared? Linus, I tread very carefully on these matters, but you know.
I'll not try. Just remember he chose a very cheap means of transport to enter Jerusalem with a donkey, and none of these prices would have affected him. But Irungu had also spoken about what this would result in terms of forcing Kenyans to asking questions, many of them back to the streets. And there's another way Kenyans are going to the streets, and that's not about protests. It's just about joblessness because of the ripple effect of some of these things. Because when you look at the new taxation measures, they look like an assault on what we wrongly consider the middle class in this country. And that's everybody who earns a little salary. What this will really translate to in terms of the immediate term is a sharp decline in the purchasing power of these people that are, of the households, basically. And what that means is trouble on a wider scale, because you have people, and remember the way it works in Kenya, one pay slip supports so many other households.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the state should not pretend and assume that society was not organized before the existence of a tax code or something like that. Life is primarily survival, first and foremost. And the bulk of people in this country are not employed. They're not actually waiting for government to show them how to make through a day's life. And what is happening now is the purchasing power has been assaulted in a way that is going to be really serious. And we're looking forward to hearing what the courts will say about the Finance Act, which introduces a tax bands, these new tax bands of 32.5% and 35%. Basically, you know, making even taxation something, introducing an element of discrimination into our tax code. So we are staring at trouble. And look at some of these propositions, whether it's even in the social health insurance scheme, you know, targeting the employee and the employer. You see, the assumption that the employer cannot feel the pinch is also something really serious. What the employers will be doing going forward is they have to really afford that wage bill. And to do that, they'll have to reduce the numbers.
Yeah.
That is what we will see. And we're looking for problems with some of these measures because they are coming even at a wrong time. Given we are all arguing about some of this being occasioned by international factors, Ukraine, international prices of oil. But the tax measures we are taking are entirely internal. There has been this craze by the new administration to raise taxes. And almost in a manner to suggest that there has been a taxation issue in this country. There has never, in my view, there's never been a taxation problem in this country. The problem has been, how do we use the taxes that we collect? What have our taxes translated to previously? Whether you're talking of the last 10 years, and especially the last 10 years, and the years before that, what taxes have been translating to is basically wealth creation for the ruling classes, wealth creation for the political class. There is a term here in this country that has been found acceptable. There's something called the election war chest, building an election war chest. What are election war chests built with? They are built with public resources that have been diverted, which is why in the EACC list, a lot of politicians end up there, whether in the counties or the national government. You find especially the first-term governors. Why do they land in trouble? MCAs, why are they landing in trouble? Members of parliament, cabinet secretaries. It's this craze called election war chest. And I think if we don't address that, new taxation measures will make no meaning at all. We'll just build bigger election war chests.
I'm not even sure they will build election war chests, because if you look at the trends, the amount of own source revenue that we've collected compared to GDP over the last 10 years has fallen. So in 2013, we were collecting 16.2%. OSR was equivalent to 16.2% of the GDP. At present, or in 2022, it was 14%. That means the growth of own source revenue is not growing in tandem with the economy. In the last 10 years, VAT has been constant at 4%. And I think studies across the world show this with VAT, that it's a painful tax to introduce, it's an easy one to collect, and then at some point it just stabilizes and remains constant. So you're not going to increase the amount of VAT and increase the collections from it, because people then will opt out of that regime. They'll downsize, they'll change the way they do their business, the way they consume, because it's not sustainable. So experts have been saying this to a government that's not listening, that we have possibly passed our optimum taxation threshold. So more taxes is totally regressive. On the progressive tax and the idea behind increasing, having a tax band that's higher at the highest levels and lower to cushion the lower levels, that's the idea of progressive taxation. There is a justice component in that, and maybe what needed to happen was to have a dialogue about Kenya is moving into a progressive taxation, but this is where the money will go. Because at the end of the day, you're talking about higher tax band, you're talking about higher contributions to health, you're talking about then taxing your extracurricular spending in, it's a real assault on the middle class. I think the only crime of the middle class in this country is that they keep very quiet, and it's this apathy and kind of just muddling along that has made them a sitting target. Because when government has introduced measures on big business, you have then seen them come back and kind of remove those measures, because big business pushes back. But the middle class and small businesses, unfortunately, are bearing the brunt of this. And countries in Southeast Asia grew on the basis of small business. A country like Kenya cannot grow on the basis of big business. Now, this is what, if you look at the 10 years under the Mwai Kibaki regime, the big difference was where money was spent.
Yes.
It was spent at the local level. 27% of the budget cumulatively between the district focus, between the local authority, CDF, blah, 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 27% was going to the local level. And that is why people felt money on the ground. Then came in the Uhuru Ruto, and they sucked up all that money. They got, consolidated the procurements. They were doing big companies, big deals, and you dry out the economy. Now, better and bottom up are doing exactly the same thing as what they did 10 years ago. Unfortunately, they are also, you have a better plan, but the spending on key sectors remains the same. In terms of energy and infrastructure are still the big ones. Energy and infrastructure is money for the big boys. That is long-term critical investment, but it's not the investment you make when you want to stimulate the economy. Health, which is, has a high multiplier, has reduced from 8% to 6%. So, they are talking about let's build health, let's do the universal, but where's the money? Their plan is to change the architecture so that we'll be paying for it. In essence, government is collecting more, but is spending less on social services. So you're being taxed from many directions, and then there is no accountability, not in terms of the caliber and integrity background of the leaders who've been put in charge of our money, not in terms of reporting, not in terms of financing the Auditor General so that we can have regular reports, in terms of doing the kind of reviews, in terms of doing policy. There is no accountability. So, Yvonne, I wouldn't say year 1, year 2, year 3. It's not that assured. We don't know what will happen when people can't put food on the table. We are going to see Kenyans walking again because they cannot afford the fuel. And if they walk, then those matatus will be grounded. This is how you grind an economy to a halt.
When you talk about, the MSME sector, and, we're talking about the taxation, particularly increasing the taxes progressively. But remember, MSMEs are the backbone of Kenya's economy. There's about 7.4 million MSMEs that are registered in the country, give or take. I'm sure that number has increased somewhat, or perhaps decreased. And they employ about 14.9 million Kenyans. Now, these are the ones who have to deal with the taxation issues like the 1.5% housing tax, which is also matched by the employer. And remember, these MSMEs are the ones who are employing anywhere from 1 person to 10 to 99, no more than that. So these are the other big companies that may or may not be able to absorb that extra cost. Many of them now consider payee as the biggest cost they have as an organization, and I'm talking about this for some small companies that I know. And they're now actually making decisions about shifting their staff towards consultancy-based contracts so that they allow a lower tax rate. Now, Linus, remember we're reading through this draft proposal where the cabinet secretary says, we're looking into measures to make sure that there is no tax evasion. But it is issues like these, this is tax evasion, which isn't illegal.
Avoidance is not.
Avoidance is not, it's evasion that is. And this is one of the clever ways that, many smaller organizations are considering towards just staying alive and keeping their members of staff, as opposed to saying, okay, we've got 50, we will have to do away with 10. But what that does is the ripple effect is it has the opposite effect, right? Because one, there's less taxes to the government.
Right.
But two, if they do decide, which they can, to, reduce their workforce, those people are out of a job. That pay you're not getting. Because they lose their disposable income, they are buying less, like you were saying, the Kadogo economy, which then also starves the government of VAT, which is a consumable tax that all of us sort of pay tax, whether you are employed or not, as long as you're buying goods, paying for services, that is what happens. And so, the reverse is true. I mean, I think we've talked around this table about how when they increased capital gains tax, tripled it, that year they recorded about a 13% decrease in the collection of capital gains tax. So I mean, you know, the numbers are there to just show you can only tax so far, and there's a limit to that. And it'll be interesting because tomorrow we're hearing from the Federation of Kenya Employers.
Right.
You know, whom we've been wondering, okay, so are they going to talk about this and what are their thoughts on it? So it'll be interesting to see what they feel about it, especially now that you've got then, you know, this huge rise in fuel prices, which just adds to that. And then staring at a second year of, well, third, fourth, fifth of, you know, possible higher taxes.
That's tomorrow, Yvonne, because
yes, it is,
right now we are hearing from David Ndii, who is the economic advisor of the president. He is on Twitter saying that the country is broke. He basically went back to a tweet he tweeted 2 years ago and says this expectation that Kenya can abuse credit for a decade and the same people can make consequences go away painlessly just because there was a game of mystical chairs we call elections. Are we sober? I told you 2 years ago, Kenya was in receivership. Nothing has changed. That is from the economic advisor.
Just before you come in, I really want to talk about, and I think we said this, remember during the power blackout crisis, about how our leaders speak to us and address some of these issues. He has a point. We're not here because of something that happened yesterday. These are historical issues. You are in a position to advise and find the solutions. Why does it feel like our noses are being rubbed in it?
Actually, someone asks him, the question is, will it get better or will it get worse for the 10 years?
Yeah.
Do you have a plan?
Then he says, maybe better, maybe worse. Who knows? We do what we think we can do. If it doesn't work, too bad. Doctors lose patients all the time despite their best efforts.
So it's just throwing mud at the wall and see what sticks?
Who's that?
David Ndii.
Who?
David Ndii.
He's
the President's economic advisor. In fact, he leads the Economic Council.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
At State House.
And how helpful is this really? How helpful, even in terms of a mere attitude of a public servant or someone working in a public office to tell Kenyans, it may work, it may work, it may be worse. Who knows? We do what we think we can, what we think can work. If it doesn't, too bad.
Yeah.
Doctors lose patients all the time, despite their best efforts. Patients in this case, and I think this is something really grave, patients in this case is the country. This is the economic advisor of the...
So the country could die.
You know, this is fascinating because just about, is it 2 weeks ago, the Cabinet Secretary for Energy spoke to the media and said the following: if the debate is, do we price July or August, whether they will be significantly expensive, he says they will be significantly expensive, and so is October and November, until you go through what is happening in refurbishment of refineries where the product is coming from. So we may not know what happens in the coming months, but at least we know how far we've come the past 1 year. And I was just looking at the figures. On the day of inauguration of President William Ruto, the price of a litre of petrol was 159 shillings. Today, a year later, a day after his anniversary, it has...
First anniversary.
Yes. It has risen by 52 shillings, 52 cents. That's a litre of petrol. For a litre of diesel, it was retailing at 140 shillings then. Now, it has gone up by 60 shillings, 99 cents. If you look at kerosene, it was at 127 shillings, 94 cents. It has gone up by 74 shillings, 67 cents. If you look at the other statistics that are important, before any taxation levies or even the profit margin for the oil marketing companies, the products are getting here at 115 shillings a litre of petrol. For diesel, it's getting here at 117 shillings, 67 cents. For kerosene, 127 shillings, 78 cents. That's landing at Mombasa. But of course, there are distribution charges, there are margins, but the taxes and levies are accounting for 79 shillings for a litre of petrol. It is 67 shillings for a litre of diesel, and it is 62 shillings for a litre of kerosene. These are some of the taxes and levies that the president promised that he was going to reduce. If you look at the taxation on VAT, going from 8% to 16%. If it had been retained at 8%, then a litre of petrol would be retailing at 196, a litre of diesel would be retailing at 179 shillings, and a litre of kerosene would be much less, just about 188 shillings. Diesel would be 186, kerosene would be 188, had the government maintained or retained the taxation of VAT at 8%.
You know, I need us to start wrapping up, but, you know, just to pick up on what, you know, David D is saying, and which seems to be a rather interesting way of communicating, you know, with this administration. It would almost feel like we're being browbeaten to some extent. So during the major power blackout that we had, we saw the chair of KPLC telling us, oh, you know, this is a good time to reconnect with your family, and, you know, not to mention the fact that the blackout in most places that lasted more than 24 hours, 36 and much 48 in other places, affected people's businesses. And it's from people who bake cakes at home and who have, you know, whatever you want to call it. And so it is the way in which those who are mandated to work for the public, who are public servants, who are paid by our taxes, the manner in which they speak to us, the manner in which they listen to us. You remember the tone that was employed during the debate around the Finance Act. Well, then it was a bill. And it was, do you have alternative solutions? But you don't understand taxation. But then there's been all of this, and there was, you know, this is what happened in the past. And that is interesting, particularly for Kenyans who are going through a tough period.
Yeah.
You know, where you say, okay, things are tough. This is the international situation. This is where we are. This is the historical, you know, basis from which we are coming from. Things are going to get a little tough. We want to, you know, carry people along. But one of the hallmarks for me for the last year has just been the tone with which public officers and state officers address the people of Kenya. And I think for me that is rather interesting. Final comments? I'll start with you, Irungu.
So I think, you know, I was thinking comparatively of different countries, and of course we don't have to follow any other country but our own path. But, you know, places like the United Kingdom, where you've seen 4 finance chancellors resign because they've been unable to fix the economy to the interests of the British, you know, the British people, or 2 prime ministers have to resign because they can do that. And I guess the question for me is, at what point will this become an option for the national administration? And I'm not calling for the government to resign. I'm actually just asking a question about, you know, democracy and democratic governments, that at a certain point you declare that actually you just don't have the capacity to be able to lead anymore. And there may be another a government out there that is potentially has better ideas than you. The second point, I think, is on the issue of tone-deaf sensitivity and the danger of essentially making light some of the hardships that Kenyans are experiencing. So, you know, the 24-hour darkness that we saw as a result of the energy collapse was not just an impact on households. It led to people die in hospitals because equipment failed. You know, and there are people who buried, you know, their loved ones as a result of the failures of the energy crisis at that period. So I think we have to demand that government continues to remain sensitive, it remains honest and clear-minded about this. But I think we have to look for a strategy that goes beyond essentially taxing everybody to the ground.
Unsure?
Yeah. We're in an economic crisis. We've been in one for a long time. And one of the calls we've had consistently is, let's have a dialogue about where we are, and let's talk about what the solutions are. But you have a government that came in knowing everything and believing their own hype, not listening to the evidence, not listening to the stakeholders. And of course, they've made one mistake after another in terms of negotiating the kind of deals and the decisions they continue to make. So the fear at this point is that they may do more damage, pour more fuel into this fire. And we don't know how much Kenyans can take. The last round of protests was maybe mobilized around the political front, but the next one could be Kenyans pushed against the wall with no choice.
Yeah.
So I don't see, this is This is not pretty now, and it could get much worse, but it's not too late for government to, and I expect we're going to hear from civil society, we're going to hear from religious leaders, we're going to continue hearing from media, but is government humble enough to listen? And maybe the last point is that it's a leadership style. The ability to listen, to consult, is a leadership style. We are seeing a lot of PR and outreach and being present, but really not listening. And at the end of the day, there is no substitute for good leadership. And the decisions that leadership makes will dictate what happens in the next 12 months. And it could get very dark. I don't like giving dire predictions, but there's no other way to call this.
I want to give you final word. You're good? Or will you do
well, I'm okay.
Yeah.
I was just concerned. You see, people that work in government, if you're a state officer, you have official transport. If you are a public officer, you probably have official transport. Or if you're at Parliament, you have mileage claim, which depends on the distance you're covering.